Good evening. My name is Tara Peterson, and I'm the CEO of the YWCA Glendale of Pasadena, an organization dedicating to eliminating racism and empowering women. Tonight's conversation is featured event of our annual Stand Against Racism campaign. As an organization proudly serving Asian American and Pacific Islander communities that make up 16% of Glendale's population and 18% of Pasadena's population, this past year, we bore witness to a horrific rise in hate crimes against our AAPI communities, accelerated by hateful rhetoric and misinformation about the COVID-19 pandemic. In the last year, over 3,800 incidents of hate crimes against the AAPI community have been reported nationwide. Here in California, we are leading the way in creating community and policy solutions to address these crimes. Tonight, we will hear from local and national leaders, government officials, and nonprofit leaders who are on the front lines working to develop awareness, enact responsive policies, and affect social change. It is my great honor to introduce one of our community's great leaders and true shiro, Congressman Judy Chu. Congressman Judy Chu was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 2009. She represents the 27th Congressional District, which includes Pasadena and the West San Gabriel Valley of Southern California. In 2011, Congresswoman Chu was elected chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, which advocates for the needs and concerns of the Asian American and Pacific Islander community across the nation. A cross-movement mobilizer, she helps lead the Tri-Caucus, a joint effort with the Congressional Black Caucus and the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. We are grateful to have her opening remarks to begin tonight's program.
Hello, I'm Congressmember Judy Chu. As the chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, or what we call CAPAC, I'm so honored to be a part of such an important conversation. And I'd like to thank your CEO, Tara Peterson, on her years of dedication to the YWCA and her leadership in getting the YWCA Glendale through this difficult year. I look forward to seeing what an incredible job you will do moving forward. Conversations like the one we are having today are essential for understanding how we can work together to stop hate crimes and ensure that all communities, and particularly vulnerable communities of color, are safe. And this is a conversation that more and more communities are having as we grapple with our country's history of institutional racism and the ongoing problem of police brutality and anti-Asian hate crimes today. And so I especially want to thank the YWCA for organizing this event and all of you for joining. Last month, our nation was shocked and horrified by the murder of 8 people in Georgia, including 6 Asian women. In response, I organized a congressional delegation to Atlanta to be with the AAPI community during this difficult time and meet with the victims' families. And we went there with a purpose: to follow the murderer's steps to show how deliberate he was in targeting 3 Asian-owned spas. Starting at the site of the first shooting, named Young's Asian Massage, we then drove 27 miles, as the shooter did, until we arrived at 2 more Asian spas that were next to each other, where he continued his murderous spree. Local sheriffs have tried to diminish these crimes by saying the shooter had a sex addiction and a bad day, but he had plenty of other places to go in those 27 miles. Instead, he chose 3 places where there would be no doubt that Asian women would be killed, and that is why there's no doubt in my mind that these shootings were a hate crime. And I've written a letter to the Department of Justice urging them to investigate it as such. Nothing could be more deliberate and intentional. The shooter's actions shouted hate when he targeted these locations. But sadly, this was not an isolated incident. Since the start of the coronavirus pandemic, there have been over 3,800 reported anti-Asian hate crimes and incidents, over 2/3 of which targeted women. They were fueled by Donald Trump's usage of the terms China virus, Wuhan virus, and Kung flu, fanning the flames of xenophobia and directing anger and blame at Asian Americans. And these attacks have gotten worse over the course of the pandemic, with increasingly violent assaults, some fatal, targeting older and more vulnerable Asian Americans. In fact, these anti-Asian hate crimes almost have become a daily tragedy, leaving many Asian Americans wondering, will I be next? That is why we in the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus have been taking action all year with press conferences, statements, letters, and legislation. And fortunately, we have already gotten help from an important partner, and that is President Biden. Within his first week in office, President Biden issued a presidential memorandum to address anti-Asian hate that instructs the Department of Justice to work with the AAPI community in finding solutions to combating anti-Asian hate and bias. And earlier this month, the president invited me and other AAPI Congress members to join him in the White House to discuss additional actions that he is taking to address anti-Asian hate and to keep our communities safe. Having the meeting with the president right in the Oval Office shows just how seriously he's taking this problem. And then another critically important thing happened last week. It was the Senate's passage of Senator Mazie Hirono's and Congresswoman Grace Meng's COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act. This bill would create a new position at the Department of Justice to help improve hate crime reporting, and it also includes the text of my bill, the No Hate Act, which will provide resources to state and local law enforcement to improve hate crimes reporting, tracking, and enforcement. The overwhelming 94-1 vote was an almost unheard of show of bipartisan support, showing dramatically that AAPIs are not alone in the fight against Asian hate. Because of this vote, we expect that during Asian Pacific Heritage Month, this will pass out of the House and then go to the President's desk to be signed into law. And I especially want to thank the YWCA for urging support of this critical legislation. Your work has helped make this possible. There are many steps we can take, but let me tell you what the most powerful one is. It is to come together, no matter our backgrounds, united in speaking out against hate and targeting any community and addressing systemic racism in our nation. And that is why today's discussion means so much to me. We cannot do this alone. So thank you for hosting today's event and to all of you for taking part.
Thank you, Congressman Judy Chu. I am now honored to introduce a dear colleague and friend, Angeline Chen, to moderate tonight's conversation. Angeline is a senior attorney at Clark Hill, where she practices immigration law. Angeline is no stranger to YWCA. She has served as the board president of the YWCA Pasadena Foothill Valley, advocating for the empowerment of girls and eliminating racism in our community, and was instrumental in our recent joining forces together of YWCA to become YWCA Glendale in Pasadena. She is also the co-founder of Rise to Reunite, a volunteer group helping reunite families separated at the border. Welcome, Angeline.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you so much for your leadership in racial justice and organizing this webinar. I am honored to host this event discussing the important issue of anti-Asian hate. Here are some numbers I have seen and are disturbing. Women have reported twice as many anti-Asian hate incidents as men. There is a huge increase in violence and harassment against Asians over the age of 65. Over 65. These are senior citizens. There's an increase in fear of elderly Asians leaving their homes, especially in New York City, where most people take public transport. When I saw that a 65-year-old Asian woman was kicked and stomped on in New York City, my heart hurt. I couldn't believe it. That could be my mother. When I saw that two teenagers set an 89-year-old shirt on fire and slapped her in the face, I also couldn't believe it. That could be my grandmother. When I talk about my work at the border through Rise to Reunite, I always try to impart this perspective. How would you feel if your child was taken away from you? What would you do to protect them? So when we're talking about anti-Asian hate crimes, no matter what your ethnic background is, ask yourself, how would I feel if my mother was attacked? How would I feel if my grandmother was attacked? What would I do to protect them? So during this event, this is what I want you to have in the back of your mind. With that, I would like to introduce our esteemed panel. We have Robin Kawakami, the senior editor at the Today Show Online, Connie Chung who is the Executive Director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice, and TC Kim, the Executive Director of the Korean American Resource Center. Thank you so much, panelists. And can you please give a little background about yourselves, please?
Hi, Angeline. Thank you for that introduction, and to Tara, and thank you so much for having me. I'm Connie Chung, the CEO of Asian Americans Advancing Justice LA. We are the largest civil rights and legal service organization for the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander community for the country.
Thank you. Robin, did you want to go?
Yes, hi, I'm a senior editor at the Today Show digital website, which is a part of NBC News. We mainly focus on lifestyle and consumer issues, but in the past year since George Floyd, we've been focusing a lot on racial injustice. And I in particular have been doing a lot more assigning stories related to anti-Asian bias. So that's become a big focus for us.
Thank you, Robin. TC Kim?
Hello, everyone. My name is TC Kim. I've been an advocate for victims' rights and victim advocacy for 35 years. I've been a board member for Glendale YWCA in Pasadena and Glendale Police Foundation and Korean American Foundation of Glendale, resident of Glendale City for about 26 years. Most recently, I put on a hat as an executive director for Korean Resource Center. I'm honored to be here with you.
Thank you so much for your time. We're going to start with Robin today. Robin, you recently shared your and your family's experiences with anti-Asian sentiment and the historical stereotypes against Asian Americans that have pervaded American history on an article in today.com. Can you share some of that story with us?
Yes, I mean, I think it started with the Atlanta shootings. A lot of emotions just came to the forefront that I just wasn't even aware I had all of this feelings behind all of that. And I think as every Asian American knows, we've dealt with racism and ignorant remarks our entire lives. So it didn't start with the pandemic. But to me, this was like the first time a national conversation was happening around Asian Americans, AAPI, and not as like a footnote to another group's suffering, but something valid and in its own right. And the whole notion of this idea of being the forever foreigner really kind of touched something off in me. My family has been in this country for over 100 years. So it's very difficult for me to comprehend. And I just started mulling all these thoughts. My dad served in the US Army. My great uncle served in the 442nd in World War II. He's 95 years old, still alive today. And I just wanted to share this idea that the API community is a fundamental part of the American story and has been. And it's so diverse, and to compare people who have been here since the 1800s with the railroad construction all the way up until new immigrants, and to lump everybody together just seems like such a disservice to the to American society in general. I think many media outlets also have pointed out that our history books devote basically a couple of graphs to Asian American history. It's like, the Chinese Exclusion Act, Japanese internment, and bye-bye, and that we're not really a part of the American story. And I think that's fundamentally a problem. It's why people look at us and you see an Asian face and you think foreigner. And that is so far from the truth. And that's just something I wanted to share with people. And I think it resonated with many. Oh.
Thank you. You mentioned your great uncle serving in World War II. I know you've been wanting to talk to him and have a longer story about that. Can you give us a little more background on that?
His story is very special. For him, it was so strange for him he was training in Camp Shelby in Alabama, I think, and right before World War II, going off to fight. And he was seeing his fellow Japanese Americans behind bars, and he was allowed to be free and train and do military exercises. And he went off to risk his life, and many of them were sent off to basically do a suicide mission in Europe. And it was something that was so painful for him that he couldn't visit Europe again until very recently. So it's just, I think this idea, this notion of being American and risking your life and doing whatever you can to prove that you're American. And yet here we are again in 2021 and people see us as not American. It's tragic, really.
Thank you for sharing that. What are some of the concerns that you have now?
Honestly, this sounds very silly, but just getting through day-to-day life without getting attacked. I mean, so I'm in New York City, which has it's been so different. I'm from Los Angeles. I grew up in Los Angeles, but I was just looking at some stats recently, and I think the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism at California State University, San Bernardino, just released some data showing that hate crimes against Asians has surged by 169% comparing 2020 first quarter to 2021. And New York City had the sharpest increase. It was a 223% increase. And that's followed by San Francisco, Boston, and Los Angeles. So here in New York, we are, living on top of each other, very diverse space, but I won't ride the subway anymore. I carry around pepper spray. I'm 8 months pregnant, so I'm also scared. I'm walking around and I fear for my life and the fact that you can't just walk outside your door and worry that someone randomly is gonna like punch you in the face or attack you. I mean, look what happened to Yao Pan Ma, the 61-year-old whose head got stomped on recently, and one of the most violent attacks I've ever seen. And it's scary. And I think talking to our friends who are not AAPI has been really helpful. My friends who are very well educated, read the New York Times and everything, when I tell them stuff where I've been yelled at on the subway or I've been targeted, they're totally shocked. And I think more people should talk about that experience because it's different when you're reading it in a media story and then you hear it from your friend and like, this is real. This is absolutely real. Everybody I know in New York City who's of AAPI descent, they've experienced some kind of some targeting.
It's interesting because you would think that if you're in a public place, it would happen less because there's so many people around. But actually, people are being targeted in public places, like you said, in subways, where everybody is there and there's no fear of any repercussions of people. And it's a serious, serious problem. Now, a lot of people are still working remote. People are starting to go back to work. People have been working, but a lot of people were working remote and now going back. What are some of the things employers can do to help Asian Americans feel safe in the workplace as we return to the office?
That's something I've been exploring as part of our coverage because I see a lot of return to work policies, and it's all talking about the pandemic, which is, of course, a focus. But it's something I've posed to my own HR team. What do we do and what do we say to our AAPI community, our colleagues about going to work? Because I'm not going to take the subway and nobody I know in this city wants to take the subway. I think what's important is to have a conversation and to acknowledge what has happened. I think a lot of people that I've talked to, their managers or their group leaders didn't even say anything after the Atlanta shootings. And like that is a part of that invisibility of being, Asian American. So just acknowledging it, talking to your direct reports, just being open about it and recognizing that this is happening. I think maybe not pressuring people to go back to work right away or come up with some kind of plan where they can either expense Ubers or Lyfts or come up with some kind of shuttle program, training, just allowing Asian Americans to have this kind of space to feel safe because I would not feel safe, especially in my condition right now, going on the subway at all and going to work. And the pandemic is kind of like less of my concern right now.
Yeah, it seems to be two issues. One is getting to work, and the other issue is at work. Will you be, depending on who your coworkers are you safe there too? And the employer needs to acknowledge that harassment, anti-Asian comments are not okay. And I think there's a lot that the employers can do, and they just have to step up. Thank you so much, Robin. We're going to segue to Connie. Connie, so Robin talked a little bit about the history of anti-Asian racism. Activists say the violence isn't new, but it escalated after racist rhetoric about COVID. What kind of escalation have you seen, and what historical context do we need to know about these acts?
So, Angeline, we know that as soon as the pandemic hit, or if people knew about COVID-19, Asian Americans started to be targeted. And it did not help that we had a former president who would refer to it as the China virus and the Wuhan virus and the Kung flu, and essentially put a bullseye on the back of all Asian Americans for what's happening and all of the emotions. But you're right, this is something that is not new. America has a pattern and practice when it feels threatened, whether by disease or external forces, of scapegoating Asian Americans. And we are seen as the forever foreigner or the yellow peril myth. And as Robin said, you cannot be ever American enough if you are Asian. So my father-in-law, who is also a decorated Vietnam War veteran, walks down his street earlier on in the pandemic and is called a racial slur because he's Chinese, a Chinese ethnicity. And it has happened not only Chinese Exclusion Act, World War II, Japanese internment, post 9/11, to South Asians and Muslims, Vincent Chen in 1982, who was killed by two laid off Detroit auto workers who blamed the Japanese automobile industry for the economic decline. Even today, within the context of this rise in anti-Asian hate, Asian American Journalists Association had reported that some American reporters of Korean descent were told not to cover the Atlanta shootings because there was concern that Korean American reporters would not be able to report neutrally. You know, it's again, we can never show our true allegiance to this country. We are never American enough. And we hear it all the time, even with small microaggressions. You know, how many Asian Americans are asked questions like, where are you from? No, where are you really from? You know, people of other descent are not asked it in that way, in the same frequency as Asian Americans are. But you're right, we don't learn about this in the history books. They don't learn about this in the K through 12 school curriculum. And that's why there is a lot of push right now to start teaching it. I think the other issue for Asian Americans is the model minority myth, which was coined in the 1960s by a white author who said Asian Americans are smart and successful and doing so well. And what's wrong with you, other communities of color? Why aren't you able to do as well as Asian Americans? And so it created a wedge for our community and other communities of color. But what it also did is it obscured our needs. It made people think, well, Asian Americans are doing great. We don't have any discrimination or challenges or oppression, which is not true both in terms of the discrimination, which we're seeing today, and also in terms of some of the needs. We know Asian Americans have the largest disparity of any racial group in economically and school educational attainment levels between the haves and the have-nots. But people in this country don't see that. And so our needs are basically obscured by the model minority myth.
Thank you, Connie. So we've heard that a lot of Asian Americans are not reporting as much as you would want them to. Why is it difficult to quantify incidences of harassment that many Asian Americans have experienced?
So what we do know is from data trackers like Stop AAPI Hate. They have reported that there have been 3,800 reports they've received since the pandemic began. Asian Americans Advancing Justice has our own hate tracker called standagainsthatred.org, where we've also logged an additional 700 or so. So we're talking about 4,000, maybe 4,500 reports. But that really is the tip of the iceberg. A Pew Research study recently came out and said that in their surveys, they estimate 10 to 30% of Asian Americans have experienced some kind of racial act or hate incident during this pandemic. Now, you multiply 10 to 30% times 24 million Asian Americans in this country, and you're talking about a lot of a lot of hate and violence happening that is going unreported or underreported. And there are a few reasons for that. Certainly language barriers is one of them. We have over 50 languages spoken by more than 50 ethnic groups who are Asian Pacific Islander in this country. Cultural barriers can also play a role. Certainly in some Asian cultures, and some folks believe, when something negative happens, you don't air your dirty laundry, you don't talk about it, you remain silent. And that can be a challenge as well. But we also know for women who, as you mentioned, have been victimized at least twice as much as men during this pandemic. When I've spoken to victims and asked, what was your fear about reporting? They've told me a few things. They said, one, I was scared I wouldn't be believed. And they said, two, I was humiliated and embarrassed. Now, what's interesting is those are the same types of reasons why victims of gender-based violence often do not report. And so we see a parallel with what's happened to sexual assault and domestic violence victims, and also Asian victims of racism. So I think there are these multitude of barriers that are keeping our community members from reporting, and why we are still underreported, but even still, we're still able to see thousands of incidents of hate incidents and hate crimes being perpetrated. And these are happening every day.
Wow. And so what is being done to try to overcome these difficulties if they're not speaking out?
So there's a couple ways you can address it. For Asian victims, we are really encouraging people to report it and to let us know. So Asian Americans Advancing Justice LA has developed a pretty robust anti-Asian discrimination work. And we have a multilingual helpline in 6 Asian languages and dialects. We have a full-time victims advocate. We have a team of attorneys. We're doing housing rights clinics because we know once the eviction moratorium is lifted, that's going to be an area where there's a lot of potential discrimination happening. We are in the schools because we know bullying is another potential hotspot area at schools right now. And we have a litigation department who can file affirmative cases. So, and we're doing ethnic media outreach so folks in the community know, because we want all Asian victims to come, but I'm most interested in our vulnerable community members, our seniors, our immigrants, and our women who have those additional barriers. So we're targeting our campaigns in that way. But the other thing we're doing is we're telling allies what you can do to provide support to the community. You can donate to Asian community-based organizations who provide linguistically and culturally appropriate services for victims. You can be speaking out loudly to your colleagues and friends and others to express your support and solidarity for your colleagues and others and community members. And also, we're encouraging people to take bystander intervention training. We offer a 1-hour virtual training through a curriculum that's developed through Hollaback, and it shows you how to safely intervene to de-escalate a situation should you see verbal harassment. Because what we know is that when these incidents happen, people go into fight or flight or freeze mode. And it happens so fast that people just don't do anything. But if you have the tools in your toolbox to know how to intervene in a safe manner, then when that moment happens, for example, you can distract the other person by, if you, let's say we're walking down the sidewalk and you heard somebody who's starting to raise their voice as an Asian person, you pretend to drop your change or you drop your coffee as you walk by. What that does is everyone for a moment is going to stop talking and they're going to look and see what happened. Sometimes that kind of distraction and interruption is all you need to diffuse a situation. Or if you're on a bus and you hear a senior being yelled at, you delegate, you go up to the bus driver and you say, hey, you need to pull over. There's something going on back here that you need to check out. So it's called the 5 Ds, and we go over those with individuals just so you know what to do, because we all need to take a part in creating a safe neighborhood. I think, as Robin said, if on the subway we are waiting for, let's say, the police to come help us, that's not going to be the solution. What we need to know that passengers right next to us have our back, that the crowds around us are going to do something about it and protect us and be allies with us at that moment.
Thank you, Connie. That's incredibly great advice. In a little bit, I think we're going to watch a little video as well to help us learn some tips on bystander intervention. So thank you for that. Can you tell us a little bit about the difference between a hate crime and a hate incident?
Sure. So a hate crime is an act of hate that rises to the level of a criminal activity and therefore could lead to an arrest or criminal prosecution. Whereas a hate incident is any sort of incident motivated by hate, but doesn't necessarily rise to a criminal level. So if you get spat on or somebody yells racial slurs at you and verbally yells at you to go back to your country, those are hate incidents that will not lead to an arrest. And actually, it's reported that 90 to 95% of the hate that we are seeing right now are actually hate incidents. They are not rising to the level of a hate crime. But so what that means is that we can't just say, all right, let's get the police involved and that will solve all of these problems. Instead, we have to say, what else do we as a culture or society need to do to create safety on the streets to prevent these hate incidents from happening?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a really important distinction. And we do want to make sure that we are texting that phone number, right? Even if it's a hate incident, so that we want to report no matter what. As if it's a hate incident, you want people to report it, right? It's all part of the research.
Yeah, and you can report on online websites like Stop AAPI Hate or standagainsthatred.org, and we have our online hate tracker in various languages as well. Or you can call 211, and they are where you report non-emergency services. And in LA, we have a program called LA versus Hate through 211, where if you call, they have a network of API serving victims organizations that can provide services to victims of hate, whether it's counseling or health or legal, and provide that kind of wraparound support to victims.
Thank you. And Connie, what is the mental health impact of anti-Asian racism, and what is being done about it?
You know, I mean, the mental health impact is that it's incredibly traumatic and it's scary for our community members. And we hear so many people saying, you know, my elderly parents will not take their daily walk to the park. We will not leave the house. Basically, you know, the pandemic and COVID-19 has sort of rendered all of us prisoners to a certain extent in our own homes, but it is doubly so right now for the Asian American community because of fear that we will be attacked when we go outside. You know, I think you think about why hate crimes have enhanced sentencing and why they feel worse to us than just other crimes of the same gravity. And it's because in a hate crime, the perpetrator is not just attacking the individual victim, they're attacking the whole community. They're saying this whole race of people, you are all a target. And so for Asian Americans, even if we are not ourselves directly experiencing hate incidents, but I would say quite a few of us have or know someone who have, but even if we have not, it feels quite personal because we know just by being Asian American, people are attacking us.
Yeah, no, definitely. It feels super personal for me. And in terms of the mental health impact, are there resources for people or what's being done about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is, you know, people are experiencing PTSD. I've heard victims talk about inability to sleep. I've heard of people having crying spurts, depression, anxiety, agoraphobia. All of these kind of mental health issues arise when you are a victim, can arise when you're a victim of hate. And so we encourage people to find counseling services that are culturally tailored to your needs. And so in LA, we have organizations like Asian Pacific Counseling and Treatment Center who are working directly with API victims. And at Advancing Justice LA, our policy office has advocated to support Rob Bonta's bill that is to provide support, to provide more funding to API victim support organizations, including for counseling services, because that, from a policy perspective, is what we need. We need funding to go down to community-based organizations working directly with Asian victims who are experiencing these mental health issues, and they need that kind of support.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much, Connie, for your wisdom and experience. We're going to segue to TC Kim. TC, I know that you and Connie have been doing a lot of work on the ground with the Asian American community. Can you talk a little bit about the resources that your organizations have been providing for the community and allies?
Certainly. Thanks, Angeline and Connie. That was wonderful. Korean Resource Center is a very progressive immigration rights and immigration advocacy organization that's been around for about 38 years. We provide services like immigration legal service, housing, counseling, social services, especially targeting for seniors, the residential care service, civic engagement activities, and youth education programs. And most recently, we are heavily involved in anti-API, AAPI hate crime campaigns. To do so, we have done several things. We produced several video series, which you're about to see in a minute. We also partnered with other organizations, have distributed what to do at a time of when you are report a hate crime, what to do at the time. We provide this and a whistle to seniors who are about to who may be becoming a victim of a hate crime. Also, we started a healing circle with the public to talk about it and to deal with these mental health issues. We also do the anti-racism training, anti-Blackness training, different type of training activities. And most recently, we are going to do the self-defense classes that a lot of people have asked us to do, just as we are getting over the pandemic. So at this point, I would like to show some of the video that our staff have produced about the campaign.
Since the beginning of the pandemic, there has been an alarming increase in violence against API communities. Around the world, API people are facing racially motivated verbal, physical, and psychological attacks at an increased rate. All injustices, including the more subtle ones, deserve attention, and all peoples deserve to be safe in their communities.
If you or anyone you know has experienced verbal assaults and racial slurs, insults, threats, or displays of hate material on your property or on public places, please speak up and report it right away. You do not need to suffer this alone and in silence.
These racially motivated attacks have taken various forms, including microaggressions, racial slurs, and brutal physical violence, which recently killed an elderly Asian community member in San Francisco last month.
민주학교는 인종차별범죄를 뿌리 뽑기 위해 핫라인을 운영하고 있습니다. 한국어와 영어 모두 제공하고 있습니다. 더 이상 인종차별범죄를 감춰서는 안 됩니다. 신고하세요. 핫라인 전화번호는 213-709-3695입니다.
Out with AAPI hate, in with safety for all.
Out with AAPI hate, in with safety for all.
아시안 혐오는 범죄, 모두에게 안전을.
Thank you for that. That was very educational. I do want to know, so how do we get these whistles and these pamphlets? Because I want one.
Of course. as part of intervention, we do partner with many other organizations, including Connie's organization as well. And we just placed the order for about 1,000 of these pamphlets, and we plan to visit senior housing facilities to distribute them. And I think the whistles will come real handy for the other part that I'm about to talk about.
Great.
And I just wanted to mention that one more time, the hotline is 213-709-3695.
Thank you. We should probably put that in the chat as well. Yeah, Connie briefly went through a little bit of the bystander intervention tips. Did you have some more that you could give us, TC?
Absolutely. At this part of the webinar, I could go over some practical matter, what you can do to prepare for this kind of the hate crime. I have a lot of abbreviation to share with you, so you can take notes if you like. The first thing I want to share with you is ODA looping, OODA looping is called. O is observation, the other O is options, D is decision, and the last is action. So when you see a hate incident or hate crime, have this go through your mind, looping it. You observe, what are you observing? What are your options? What can you do? We're gonna talk about it. Then you have to decide which action you're gonna take and take action on it. You keep looping it as situation changes or escalates or de-escalates, you need to make a decision. And Connie has mentioned about the bystander, the training. So many of these incidents, we have witnessed that there are many bystanders who did not take any actions that has caused worse situation and the more victimization. We don't want to see that happen. And this, as she has mentioned, the Hollowback 5Ds is actually an excellent program. Actually, it started with the green dot as 3D, and they got more to 5Ds. Originally, it was distract, delegate, and direct, and later they added document and to delay. Kind of give a great example of how to distract. Just a little bit of making sound or something can distract the situation, okay? And the other one is delegate. That is, if you fear for your own safety, you can delegate to somebody else. You can find somebody around you to see if somebody else can help you. It could be a restaurant owner, or it could be a bus driver, or somebody else. Hey, that person needs help. You can delegate to somebody to help you, and you can work together to even cause a distraction. And when it comes worst, and you know you have to intervene, that's when the direct comes in, that when you can say something to actually intervene, stop that or do something, intervene. And when it's safe to do so, safety is very important, safe to do so, please document. That is, if you have a phone, you can video record and make evidence that can be later used by law enforcement. When you do so, please not share with anybody. You have to ask the permission from the person who's getting victimized about using that video. And also you can delay. You can sit with that person after the incident. The comfortable person, are you okay? Do you want to talk about it? Do you have some way to get help? You can talk about it. These are 5 Ds that you can remember to do. And as you do it, even before this happens, I would like all of you to think about 3 I's. 3 I's, 1, 2, 3 level of I's. First level of I's, information. You need to, before an incident happens, before you get victimized from anything crime, you need to remember a few things that anybody can become a victim of a crime. And you need to have information on that. Well, do you know where to go get help? Which law enforcement call that covers your home or your workplace? Have the information handy. Some of the hotlines that we're providing or other resources, have those information and resources handy, so when it comes to time, you know where to call to seek help. There's a wonderful program called the Victim Assistance Program, for instance. They provide a lot of assistance for victims, including the hate crime. They can cover medical costs, psychotherapy, treatment costs, loss of wages or loss of support. And even when you are trying to help somebody who's getting victimized, if you get injured, there's what's called a Good Samaritan, where up to $10,000, it'll cover the costs, like if you get injured or anything like that. So there's other programs that can provide support to the victims and survivors of these incidents. So first I is information gathering. The second I would call it intuition. I think especially the seniors, especially the women, have a lot of intuition. So if you go at night, you shouldn't, if you don't feel like going out by yourself, please don't. If you don't feel like you want to walk down that alley because something strange you feel, don't walk down that alley. There's an intuition. If you feel unsafe to go market that morning, do not go. Follow your intuition. That helps a lot. And the last I is instinct. All of a sudden, you may feel some sudden chill down your spine, or you feel like, okay, something's about to happen. Leave the place immediately. Follow your instinct. That can save your life. Those are 3 I's I like to share with you. And then there's another abbreviation. If you do, there's no way to go around it. And if you do become victimized from a hate incident or attacks, anything like that, please try to remember ABCDE. A, B, C, D, E. A is staying alert and aware of your surroundings. Okay, and B is be careful where you talk, how you talk, or where you look, where you see. Sometimes you're supposed to remember how the suspect looks like, but don't stare at him. That might cause more escalation. Okay, C is you try to collaborate, you cooperate. Okay, all right, I'll leave. I won't stay around here. You try to cooperate, but when it comes time when no matter what you do, if somebody's going to really harm you, you feel that sensation. If you must defend yourself, E, element of surprise can save your life. Element of surprise, yelling, shouting, whistle, doing something like that can save your life. That momentary pause that can save your life. For instance, try to remember, even if you forget anything, try to remember the word stop. Since we were young, in our brain, we've been told that when you hear the word stop, anybody, say pause for a moment. So you can say stop and do something. Element of surprise, yelling out. These are some of the tips that we can provide that you can try to remember. Prepare ahead when it happens. Follow through. Try to follow through these directions. If you see somebody else who's getting, but don't be just a stranger as a bystander. Do intervene, please. Thank you.
That was great, TC. That was those acronyms. It's so much easier to remember when you have the acronyms. And we should really all go to this training to even practice it even more. TC, what can be done or is being done to make the communities safer?
To have the mentality where, like I said, anybody can become a victim. At the same time, anybody can become an advocate. Tell yourself you are going to be an advocate. And also attend these rallies, attend these webinars, get yourself more educated. What you try to become is you can become an organizer. Invite people, call your friend. You know, there's this issue that I need to talk to you about, or let's attend these events together or rallies together. That's how you can easily become an organizer. Actually, at this point, it's good to have an action statement. So if you can all, for a short time, follow me and repeat after me, shout together with me. The action statements. I will not allow hate to control my life. Please follow.
I will not allow hate to control my life.
I will speak up against hate crimes.
I will speak up against hate crimes. It's only my voice, TC, but let's do it.
All together if possible. I will report hate crimes and hate incidents right away.
I will report
hate crimes.
Hate incidents right away.
Hate incidents right away.
If I'm a bystander, I will intervene and help out.
If I'm a bystander, I will intervene and help out.
Because I'm an advocate.
Because I'm an advocate.
And I'm an organizer.
And I'm an organizer.
And I'm a fellow human being.
And I'm a fellow human being.
Just like you.
Just like you.
Thank you.
Thank you, TC. That's beautiful. So to all the panelists, and we touched upon this as well, what can we do to help for those who are watching and who want to help? What can we do? If anyone wants to take it.
Well, I would suggest 2 things. For if you are Asian, I would encourage you to report any hate crimes or hate incidents that you experience or those of your loved ones. Encourage others to do so as well. And for anyone who identifies as an ally to the community, take a bystander intervention training. Express your support to folks around you who are Asian American to let them know that this is not okay and that you stand in solidarity with us, and ask folks how they're doing. And support your local API community-based organizations that are working with victims, whether they're providing mental health or legal services or whatever else, and invest in those API organizations.
Also, education is a key, and the best place to start the education is your family, your own family. Talk about this with your children. Talk about AAPI, hate crime, making sure that they know what to do. Educate your family first and your close friends and move forward.
That's great. That's great advice. I think with this, we can go to questions. We do have some questions here. And let me see. So this is a good one. It sounds like it's kind of from an employer. What is the appropriate language to acknowledge recent violent incidents without making the AAPI person feel singled out in the workplace? So it's probably a company with maybe only 1 or 2 AAPIs. How would the employer, what's the best way to talk about it, I guess is what they're saying.
Well, I can tell you I have companies asking me every day to give presentations to the entire workforce around what's happening in the community. So that way people can in the company can learn about it. And it also creates a safe space for staff to feel like I can talk about this and I can also come with my authentic self and my racial identity and put it out there. So I would encourage employers to have those kinds of open discussions, whether it's a town hall or a presentation around anti-Asian hate. And May is the perfect time because it is Asian Pacific Heritage Month. I would say employers I hear a lot of allies feeling like they're worried about how to say something to an Asian person that they know. And I would say just do it. It is awkward and uncomfortable if you've never spoken in that kind of racially explicit way to somebody before, but you get better as you go along. Just go ahead and send that email, or when you talk to that person, say, hey, are you doing okay? What's happening in the Asian community right now is absolutely awful, and I just want you to know that I'm here for you, or I stand in solidarity with you. You get better at it, and it feels more natural the more times you do it. But I've heard too many people say, I was scared to say it. I was scared to put it on Facebook. I thought it would sound corny or cheesy or unauthentic. You should know that your Asian colleagues are really emotionally struggling right now. I know people who are not able to sleep. They're not able to focus at work. They're just trying to keep it together. And so you giving that space to say, acknowledge that, it can be very helpful. So just go ahead and try it and do it.
I completely agree. TC, did you have something?
Sure, I would suggest that the management communicate better with the line staff and get their input, get their opinions about the need, what needs to be trained, what kind of workshops that could be done at a workplace. Share ideas, what would they want to happen, what would they want to see at the workplace. And I may want to start with the anti-racism training first, and then move forward and make sure that they all agree that there's a need to have an AAPI hate crime a workshop against that, and then move forward in that direction.
Yeah, that's great advice. Great advice. And I do agree with just reach out to your AAPI friends and colleagues, because I've been getting a lot of that, and it's just nice to hear that they're thinking about me. And I can see how some people could feel awkward, but I really do agree that reaching out is really important and really appreciated. So another question. What ways have communities of color supported one another amid the pandemic and a national reckoning on race? Does anyone want to take that? It's kind of a big one.
Sure. Sorry, I feel like I just keep jumping in, but right now the way communities of color are banding together is to stand in allyship with one another and to acknowledge that we are all in this together to fight a larger issue of structural racism and what has been a structure of white supremacy in this country. It's that anytime one of us is brought down, all it does is it supports a structure that is putting a white hierarchy over other communities of color. And so I saw in the question box about, who is oppressed more and things like that. I really encourage folks not to fall prey to a game of oppression Olympics. I don't want to talk about this group is oppressed more than other. Is it harder to be an Asian trans immigrant female in this country, or is it harder to be a bisexual, uh, Black youth in this country? I don't know, but the fact of the matter is it doesn't help the discussion. What is better to focus on is to focus on the fact that all communities of color have been oppressed in this country, and we've all had our fair share of discrimination. And what we need to do is not let a wedge be driven between any one of us, but really focus on the big picture, which is to uplift us all. And that we can do that with affirmative action. We can do that with voting rights. And right now there's a redistricting campaign. I mean, there's so many areas where communities of color just need to say, let's not let anyone play that game with us, and let's just have each other's backs. In this moment of time, I think the Asian American community needs to recognize that the reason we're getting this attention right now from media, from mainstream society, why people are talking about anti-Asian hate is because the Black Lives Matter movement last fall paved that way for us. That was when there was a public reckoning in this country that anti-Blackness is not just a Black problem, it is an American problem, and we need to all address it. Because that was done, we are now able to say, hey, look at the Asian community and how we are being targeted. And this is not just an Asian issue, which is how it was seen in the beginning of the pandemic when no one was talking about anti-Asian hate, even though it was happening then too. But now we're saying, let's look at it as a systemic issue in this country. And so let's keep that focus on how we can continue to build allyship and work together, because Asian Americans, unfortunately, we're the flavor of the week for oppression. But the oppression and discrimination is not going to start or end with us. Someone else is going to come next. And when they do, they need to know we have their backs, just like they've had ours.
And communication.
That is a great answer.
And communication is a key for collaborative efforts by the communities of color organizations. So I would advise that each organization designate at least one person to be a communicator with other organizations. So they share information, they make a joint statements, they do rally together. So these efforts are more combined and there are more power in numbers.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great idea. That's a great idea. Do you feel that you've seen a lot more Asians become more active now that this is happening? I feel that a lot of my Asian American colleagues are speaking out a lot more than they used to. Even Robin writing an article, I've always wanted Robin to write, and finally, I see her write. I love it. And she's a senior editor. She doesn't have to write, but she did it. And I do see that happening. Do you also see that happening?
Yes, absolutely. It's pretty exciting time in that sense that unprecedented efforts and the idea that we all can come together in this kind of consensus and do a joint activity, it's pretty exciting that we can actually make something happen. We can actually make huge progress in the fight against racism and white supremacy. And this is pretty exciting time.
We need to cultivate that, right? And continue that, because people, I think once it stops becoming in the forefront of the media, people start forgetting. And I tell my colleagues, you have to post about it. You have to keep talking about it, because it's going to continue. And don't stop being active. Like, don't stop being active. So, well, we're pretty much out of time. And I really wanted to thank our panelists for your expertise and experience. It was so valuable and I learned so much. Tara, did you want to have some final words?
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you so much, Angeline, for reaching out to us over a month ago and said, hey, we need to do something about this. And I just really appreciate your leadership and helping us put together this panel and inviting Robin to be at the table. And just want to thank you, Robin, so much for sharing your story and for being here with us. TC Kim, our board member, thank you so much for being a part of this event and being just so flexible and willing to participate. And Connie, my dear friend, my sister, thank you so much for just bringing your just your knowledge and your wisdom and making and tying that connection to how the barriers that victims of violence against women face and the same barriers that you're seeing there. I think it's so important that we show people those intersections around communities of color and gender. And it was just an amazing panel discussion. I got teary-eyed watching the video, TC, so thank you so much for sharing that. And again, just so much gratitude. And we are going to continue to do this work, and we will be in solidarity with you all every step of the way. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you to all of our folks that joined this evening. This will be recorded and posted later, so people can go back and watch it and share it with your communities and with other folks as well. So thank you all.